Hi, welcome to today's webinar, Facing the Workflow Automation Gap Head On. My name is Jay Blenderman and I'm with BMC. In a moment, I'll introduce our guest speakers. But first, from a logistics perspective, we're going to take questions at the conclusion of the presentation. So please submit any questions you might have using the GoToWebinar chat mechanism. So I'm going to start with Basil Faruqui. Basil's a Principal Solutions Marketing Manager at BMC's Digital Automation Business Unit. His key areas of focus are developing the business unit's market position and messaging, as well as driving the roadmap in the areas of multi-cloud and DevOps. Basil has more than 18 years of industry experience in areas of software research and development, customer support, technical marketing, and knowledge management. Now I'm going to introduce our other guest speaker, Christopher Condo. Chris is a principal analyst on Forrester's application development and delivery team and conducts research into agile and DevOps processes and methodologies, including continuous integration, continuous delivery, value stream management, and other enabling technologies. Prior to Forrester, Chris has been a software professional with close to 30 years of experience in coding and leading engineering teams. Notably, Chris was a software engineer at Microsoft for more than 13 years, where he was an original Office 365 product development team member. In addition to creating elements of Office 365, Chris also contributed to the development of supporting technologies such as cloud configurations, secure development tools, secure deployment tools, security tools, and other automation tools that were needed to deliver and maintain a large, massively scaled applications across multiple data centers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Jay. It's a pleasure being here with BMC. So let's just jump right into it. The agenda on my side is really, we're going to cover the inconsistent adoption of automation, which indicates trouble for many companies. We're going to talk about automation and how it drives business results. And then the results from shifting to greater workflow automation and what we've seen from our research that we've done with BMC. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story. How many times have you heard this, right, in your IT team? An internal client says, hey, can we automate this workflow process? It's been giving me trouble. It feels like there's opportunity here. And your IT engineer, you know, with best of intentions says, sure, let me write a script. I'll take care of that. I can automate that, no problem. But you know, that can kind of lead to some trouble, right? It seems like good intentions. It seems like the right approach, but let's see what happens on this next slide, right? What we find is that over time, the increasing complexity of all these processes and just the sheer number of automation processes sort of outpaces our ability to maintain these scripts, to maintain these one-off kinds of you know, environments. And what we have is a bunch of people who, a bunch of companies that are struggling really. They're struggling because they're not thinking about automation first. They're thinking about how to write one-off scripts, how to help people out in the moment. They're not thinking it through. They're not thinking about a long-term strategy. They're thinking very tactical. And so what we see is this big automation requirement gap as shown in this particular diagram. Next slide. So what do we have? Instead of like, you know, an automation strategy, an automation throughout the organization that is structured or well thought out, or stuff that, or automation that can maybe be used in multiple facets of the business, we have a bunch of snowflakes and CLIs, right? We've got people that are just hacking away at the screen. We've got people trying to write these scripts that aren't being source code controlled. Everybody's got a one-off version of those scripts because they go to their favorite IT person to help them automate something, or things that happened, you know, 6 months ago got encoded, but then maybe they haven't been maintained or well kept. And now when it's time to do that same process again, nobody remembers how those scripts work. So it just becomes, kind of creates a big mess. Next slide. So We actually did some commissioned research with, this is actually, I'm sorry, this is Forrester's, no, this is the commissioned research, I'm sorry. So Forrester and BMC teamed up, and we did some surveys, did some research into, what's going on in this world of automation, this world of IT. And what we find out is for many, application workflows miss the mark, right? When we ask customers and clients, what priority will your organization be placing on the following IT initiatives over the next 12 months? What we found out is they want to improve their ability to respond to business. They want to improve the experience of their organization's external customers. They want to do all this improving overall IT efficiency, free up IT staff, improve IT flexibility. But on the flip side of it, when we dug deeper, we found out that the workflows don't actually help them with these things. Success depends on the right people, process, and technology. A lot of companies don't actually have those three elements. And the technology to support workflow automation at scale, it exists, but it's not really being used very well. Next. So what we've decided, what we've come to the conclusion of, is that business really need to adapt or go under, right? If you're not thinking about technology, if you're thinking about your primary job as a technology babysitter, guess what? Those are declining businesses. A growing business thinks about it as a technology developer, right? So you go from just being a babysitter of systems to thinking about how can you develop and automate those things further. You take your working environment, you go from a command line interface, which is what declining businesses are doing, and you think about it from a software development, software engineering perspective. You take your primary value skill as a troubleshooter and you shift it to code writing. So what are we seeing? We see a lot of this shift of the traditional IT engineer shifting from, script jockey, as people would call it, to more of an engineering approach, right? How do you take something and write a piece of automation that stands up over time versus something that's just a one-off? And that's what we found throughout this research that Forrester has done, where declining businesses are stuck on these old ways of working in silos, deep technology detail, and the growing businesses, the ones that are moving ahead, are thinking it much more from a systematic, from an engineering approach, from a development approach. And those are what the leading businesses are doing. Next slide. So despite all the evidence and good intentions, workflow automation challenges remain, right? So during this research, we found out that on average, decision makers report that their organizations have 8 employees involved in orchestrating application workflows. It doesn't sound like that's really focusing on delivering value or delivering customer satisfaction. The processes. On average, 32% of organizations' critical digital services depend on multiple manual handoffs between systems or teams. What does that sound like? A bunch of silos that are getting in the way of actual automation and actual process flow. That doesn't sound like you're really helping your customers either. And then from a technology perspective, 77% of decision makers say their organizations use multiple tools to execute workflows. They require 3 different tools on average. So again, that doesn't sound like you have a single solution. It sounds like you have a bunch of solutions all in the mix trying to make this piecemeal system work. It's not working. That's why those are the businesses that we see declining, and the ones that are advancing are thinking about this more from a systematic approach. Next slide. So workflow automation deficiencies result in real world business issues. So we just talked about some of those things about manual handoffs and 8 people in the middle of the process. How often do application workflow difficulties lead to the following? This is what this results in, this kind of deficiency in automation. Services not completed in time for the business, right? 67% of our respondents tell us that their workflow issues, although they are a priority, aren't really coming through for completing services on time. Excessive manual work to create and manage workflows. Again, 67%, 2/3 of the respondents say they have excessive manual work to create these workflows. That doesn't sound like they're focusing on delivering value to their customer, right? So people have good intentions. They're doing things in one-off manners, and the results are they're not actually being able to deliver on the promise they have to their external customers or to their internal customers. So it's just not really working that great for them. Next slide, please. So adopting workflow, so then we ask the opposite question, right? So if you have adopted automation, does it have any tangible and positive results. And so the question was, to what extent have your workflow automation capabilities improved the following metrics? And what do we see? 1.2 times more likely the reduction of risk. Now that's something that we didn't really necessarily ask about because we were thinking about delivering value and delivering it quickly. But if you think about it, if you've automated a workflow, you've automated your processes, and you've ingrained your best practices into your workflow systems, you're reducing the risk of having an issue, of having an error, of having bad quality, or a security risk getting out to your customers. The reduction in overall costs, 1.7 times more likely. So it's no wonder, right? You have 8 people before, maybe you have many fewer people now involved in those processes, those handoffs, and perhaps time to market has reduced as well. A reduction of errors, 1.6 times more likely. Improved quality of release candidates, 1.4 times more likely. And then the reduction of number of service interruptions, 1.8 times more likely. So it's obvious that if you do use automation, and those respondents that we surveyed indicate such, that they're actually getting tangible results from having a workflow automation system. Next. So these are some of the 3 leading ingredients to success. We referred to it earlier, people, process, and technology, right? How well do the following statements describe your IT organization? And so, on the people side, 66%, our leadership promotes adaptability to change and supports collaboration, right? 67% on the process side, we've effectively integrated disparate processes and islands of automation. On the technology side, we are effectively using release automation to manage the release of packages production. So, if you have these 3 things in balance, these clients are you're in the higher maturity category. If you don't have them in balance, if you're on the lower maturity scale, well, then you're in the lower bracket. 45% report that their leadership promotes adaptability and change. So obviously leadership is an important aspect of this, right? The whole idea of, top-down encouragement and enablement, and bottoms-up innovation and capability. From a process perspective, the same thing, almost a 13% difference between those in high maturity and those in low maturity. And then with a technology perspective, well, a lot of people are investing in technology regardless of whether they're high or low. And so obviously, if those 2 things are kind of even on the technology side, it must mean that people and process are other indicators of higher maturity, because those are the areas where there's greater differentiation. Let's take a look at the next slide. So leaders look for greater control in keeping customers happy, right? So what benefits do you expect from having a single workflow automation solution with all these capabilities, right? What people are looking for is greater visibility and control, improved experience for external customers, better able to maintain compliance and regulations, and then cost savings and operational agility and other important aspects come after. But the idea of having greater visibility and control, being in control of the process is really important. It allows you to maintain, best practices, compliance, governance, security, helps you with quality. And then the improved experience for external customers, it's obviously, it's kind of a no-brainer as well, right? The idea that if you can control what you're delivering to your customer with a greater degree, then you can improve that overall experience. So these are all good reasons for adopting and keeping, the idea of adopting a single automation system. Next slide, please. So this might sound kind of harsh, but avoid the fool with the tool traps. Look for these instead, right? So don't just like, hey, I've got a widget, let's use it. Automate capture and management of workload output and logs, right? So capture all these workload logs, all the outputs that are coming from them, try to aggregate them into one system that can allow you to understand what's going on in your overall systems of automation. Have an ability to weave automation into your software delivery lifecycle without complex scripting, right? Whether it's workflow automation or software delivery automation or business process automation, the idea is that you should be able to weave into that automation capabilities and automation aspects, and then get rid of all the complex scripting, all that technical debt that you're currently managing. Use role-based access to have dashboards and views that appeal to the different end users that are using these automation tools, and have a single point of control. Have a system that allows you to see all of the various pieces of automation, all of the control that's going on, so that can easily be managed, adjusted, and monitored to make sure it's delivering the results that you want it to. Next slide. So these are the recommendations from Forrester's research and the commission research that we did with BMC. Stop using quantity of automation systems as a proxy for quality, right? I hear from plenty of people during inquiries like, I've bought all these CI/CD tools, I bought these automation tools, but yet I'm still not going any faster. Well, the problem is that they're not focusing on the people side of it, where there's leadership, where there's enablement, the process side, where people have, where teams have these processes quantified inside application workflow automation systems. Instead, they just focus on a bunch of tools that aren't really connected. So don't add up all the tools and say, oh, I must have a great automation system. Make sure you have the quality of those systems in focus as well. Start using outcomes to measure automation effectiveness. Don't just count up all your tools. Don't just click off a bunch of workflows and say work items and say, it looks like we're done. What you really want to know is, how effective were you? What was the impact of all this automation? Did you deliver something with better quality? Was it delivered with better compliance and governance? Were customers happier with these products? Did you deliver more value? Those are outcomes of all of the work that you're doing. If you just focus on outputs, then you're not going to get there. You're going to find that you're getting a lot of work done, but you're not really delivering any impact. Create OKRs to quantify results. You can use OKRs, which are objectives and key results. You can use other systems to set primary objectives as well. But when you set up a system of, I have an objective, which is a business objective, whether it's to deliver more value, to deliver greater revenue, to shorten time to value, to get products out the door to customers faster, to improve time to market. Those are quantifiable results that you should be measuring on the back end to see if your automation systems are actually delivering upon those promises that you're delivering, that you're making to your business. And then select automation technologies that drive results. Don't just pick a bunch of things that look like the latest fad. Pick tools that actually deliver results and deliver them to the business and your customers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So when we commissioned this research with Forrester and when we looked at the results, what we found is that it really validated something that we have been seeing at BMC, particularly within the Control M line of business, is that the need for workflow orchestration has been there. It's not new. It has been there since it's as old as computing itself. You can go all the way back to the mainframe days, and this was a need. But what it has validated and really underscored is that as companies are accelerating their modernization, the complexity of underlying systems that are delivering those business services is getting more and more complex. And this whole approach, like Chris was describing, snowflakes and CLIs, is not only problematic, but it's going to be a major roadblock as companies look to innovate. So as you know, there's a lot of change going on in the world, and I want to start with a slide that kind of is a CIO level view of how many CIOs that we talk to are visualizing this change. So, you know, if you take the clock back maybe 10 years, the focus for IT was something like this, that, you know, there was a lot of investment into infrastructure, building data centers. There was a robust team of operations that would, you know, make sure those data centers were able to host applications that ran in production. And a lot of the applications, particularly the big box applications, if you will, were back office applications like ERPs, CRMs, and such that ran kind of on this stack of infrastructure and operations. But as companies are looking to innovate rapidly, a lot of the focus is on the application, because businesses realize that it's the application that actually delivers value back to the business. You know, building more data centers, for example, or investing in more infrastructure doesn't necessarily help the business move forward. So essentially the pyramid has been inverted. Applications is the big focus. Operations is highly automated. They're shifted to an agile and DevOps paradigm. And infrastructure is really important, but it's getting commoditized as people move more towards SaaS and public cloud, even private cloud. You know, the focus is not on infrastructure. The focus is on the application. And the idea is, I think it was the CIO of Capital One that said it at a large conference, that we're not in the business of building infrastructure, we're in the business of building great applications that help our bank deliver value to customers. So with this focus completely inverting, what does that mean from an automation perspective? Well, it means a lot of different things, but most importantly, you now have to think about workflow orchestration as part of your software development lifecycle. You can no longer afford to work on application development all the way up until it's ready for production and then figure out how to bolt on some orchestration that'll actually deliver those services in the real world. So, and at BMC, we believe that companies are not only trying to transform to being a digital enterprise, but actually being an autonomous digital enterprise where majority of the processes, or as much as possible, should be hands-free and autonomous. Now, when we look at this challenge of orchestration, on the far right-hand side are some, very staple business services that many businesses have to deliver. If you're in banking or retail, you're looking, end of day close is really important. Payment processing is important almost in every industry. If you're manufacturing, retail, and other industries, supply chain is a very, very critical part, and things like billing, payroll are all essential services that businesses have to deliver. And this used to be often the core, or represents some of the core services that IT used to deliver, and it used to sit on a stack of somewhat limited applications, like I mentioned earlier, ERPs, distributed systems, mainframes, and whatnot. And there was, within operations, there was a core group of teams that would access these technologies and deliver these services. So you had schedulers, file transfer teams, administrators, and whatnot. But as time has gone on, the complexity across the board has increased. There's pressure from the business to rapidly deliver new services, where things like AI and machine learning driven services such as fraud detection and digital wallets and things of that nature are becoming commonplace. And so is the stack in the middle. There's a plethora of new technologies, particularly with the advent of open source. This technology stack is becoming more and more complex. And the personas here on the far left, that's also a growing list. You have new teams, data scientists, big data teams. Business users are much more tech savvy. The term biz tech users, they have an interest in a lot of cases using these technologies and becoming a part of delivery of these services, or at the very least have a stake in understanding how these services are performing as a process owner, as a business owner. And with particularly the adoption of public cloud, what we're also seeing is that companies are rapidly, in some cases, switching out technologies. They may have started with, for example, sentiment analysis services on a particular cloud vendor, but they realize that natural language processing is better on another public cloud, and now they want to switch that out or bring that into the fold of the service that they deliver. Again, this rapid switching of technologies also poses a challenge from an orchestration perspective, because as you bring in new technologies into the fold, what you can't afford to do is completely rewire your orchestration strategy every time. Or as Chris mentioned, you can't be dependent on script jockeys to basically script every time you have a new technology. So really the need is to make sure you have a platform for orchestration automation in which you can bring in new technologies and plug those in. And that's exactly the problem we've been addressing with Control-M, is provide a layer of abstraction over these technologies so that there's a single point of control and visibility on how you automate these business services. And different teams, by the way, have purpose-built interfaces so that they can interact with it. I'll talk more about this, but an important point to think about here is the way a developer is going to interact with a tool is different from how a business user would expect to interact with it. and we were recently in a conversation with a CIO of a very large German auto manufacturer, and they shared with us that they have over 6,000 applications in their portfolio. And you can imagine that they can't afford to have 6,000 different ways of automating those applications, and that's why they rely on Control M to orchestrate the delivery of the business services. Now, many of the examples on the previous slide, the business services, are actually, if you double click into them, they're actually data pipelines. If you think about fraud detection, if you think about supply chain management, it involves a lot of collection of data, processing of data, and of course, all of that is in service of being able to drive insights. And when we double click into that process, it brings to life complexity that we see across the board. And data pipelines is that all of these have 4 distinct stages. You're ingesting data from multiple sources, you have to store and process the data, and you have to deliver insights. Right out of the gate, the first stage can be quite daunting because the number of systems of record that are available to companies to ingest from can be quite complex, and you add to that unstructured sources of data, such as clickstream data from websites, social media data, IoT data from devices and sensors. And particularly with the adoption of public cloud, there is no shortage of tools and services that are available to store and process the data. Things like Spark have been quite revolutionary in driving in-memory processing of data. Hadoop has played a very critical role, and we're seeing modern data warehouses such as Snowflake, Redshift, Synapse playing a really major role in scaling the storage and processing of data. And then you get to the final stage, the last mile, if you will, of how do you actually visualize this data. Again, that's also a very complex list. And when you think about automating a process that's dependent on a data pipeline like this, what you can't afford to do is have a bunch of scripts that were developed in silos to automate a process like this. And this is exactly why, when that approach is taken, the results from the survey that Chris was sharing show that companies face a lot of inefficiencies. And in fact, it's more than inefficiencies. In many cases, they result in failures. And if you fail to scale, you've essentially failed. An example that I often use here is, I think this was about a year ago, that Walmart was piloting with Uber delivery of grocery services. And they were piloting this in a couple of cities in the US. Now, if that pilot is successful, the question is, well, how long Walmart's management is going to give their technology teams to scale this nationwide? And the fierce nature of competition in retail, tells us that it's not going to be a 5-year project or 7-year project. That's something that'll need to be delivered in months, which means that not only do you need to have a product and service that can be tested and prototyped quickly, but it's also should be scaling very, very quickly. So the ability to automate and orchestrate workflows also goes to the scale question, that in early stages in prototyping, scripting, and CLI-based approach may actually look pretty attractive. But the moment you think about going nationwide and global with this process, it becomes quite clear that that will be not only challenging, but actually may be the root cause for not being able to scale. And again, our role, as I mentioned in the previous slide, is to provide a layer of abstraction. And sometimes I have to be careful with the slide, is sometimes people think that somehow Control is replacing all the technologies that were on the previous slide. That's not the case. We're providing a layer of abstraction to automate across this. In fact, that's the whole reason Control M exists, is because you have so many different technologies behind this layer of abstraction. This brings us to another challenge that companies have faced that have been at work for orchestration for a while. Workflow orchestration, which has been known by other names such as job scheduling and workload automation, also in the past has been the domain of IT operations. Tools like Control M have been owned and operated by operations and teams of schedulers often. But the tool is not in service of the scheduling team. It's actually automating the workflows of applications, and developers are building those applications. So the process in many organizations has been one where it's been quite chaotic and inefficient in how developers are sharing and requesting the information from the schedulers. If they want to build a new workflow, they often have to fill out a help desk ticket, send it to the schedulers, and they will have to translate that request into Control M and then put it to production. Developers often see that process as chaotic and inefficient is because there's often a lot of back and forth. Schedulers have standards that they want to implement in production. Developers may not always be familiar with those standards. Naming conventions are a classic example. If everybody called their workflow XYZ, in production, you will not know when there's a problem. Is this XYZ that runs on SAP, or is this XYZ that runs on the mainframe or the cloud, so on and so forth. So standards are important, and ops has the responsibility traditionally to ensure resilience and reliability. But when we saw this, we particularly saw this about 6 years ago when we expanded Control M's reach into applications like Hadoop. And when we took some of our initial prototypes to market, the feedback from the development side was that this is great, but if I don't have more of a self-service experience in how I can build and test workflows and get them over to the ops team in an automated fashion, or ideally get them straight into production in an automated fashion with automated testing, then this would be a roadblock. And this is where we, about 5 years ago, introduced an as-code approach with workflows. This also goes along the lines of what Chris was mentioning in the survey, that teams, the businesses that are doing well compared to the declining businesses are taking more of a engineering approach versus a babysitter of technology approach. You should be able to define workflows of Control M and an orchestration service just like you define the rest of the application logic. Now that code could be Java or Python or whatever the case may be. And the same way, you should be able to declare and define how you will orchestrate that Java code or Python code and how does it connect to other applications. And as companies have adopted CI/CD models, this became even more important, that definition of workflows can be done in an as-code format so that you can commit it to a source code management system that can flow through a CI/CD pipeline and make it ideally all the way into production. But this is also where governance is important. Remember, we talked about that ops has been tasked with making sure that reliability and resilience of systems in production is highly important, just because that was some of the initial questions and concerns we got from ops when we introduced the approach, which was, well, this is a great idea. We can see how this would be useful. Developers will have self-service access from an as-code approach. However, they're not aware of standards. How do we make sure that they're going to comply to standards? So governance and standards is built into that process that are going to guide the developer in a manner that they will follow the standards. This is the analogy I often use here as shopping online. When you're shopping online, you get to the credit card field and you're about to pay, you can only enter a 16-digit number there. It can't be your name, can't be your address. And that's basically the tool guiding us to a standard that you must follow this, otherwise the transaction will fail. So similar approach we've taken with that and getting into production. Now, the other persona that we talked about and has always been important, but I think has gained even more importance as business users are much more technology savvy, is that they need to understand the health of the delivery of the services that they are sponsors and process owners for. And the as-code approach will not work for the business users. Business users are not going to be reading, JSON code or error codes coming out of Control M to determine whether or not their business services are performing on Are they going to be on time or not? And this is where we offer mobile interfaces for business users so that they're always up to date. They can track the progress. They can even, in some cases, order their own ad hoc workflows. We often saw situations where they had processes, for example, that ran at the end of the month to produce some critical reports, but there was an important meeting coming up and those same reports now needed to be run somewhere in the middle of the month. And that was often a request to operations to execute that request. Well, through a mobile app, if they've been given the right level of access, they would be able to order some of their ad hoc workflows on their own and not be reliant upon the ops or the dev teams. And here's a quote at the bottom from a finance manager at Sky. Sky's been a controlling customer for a long time. The self-service approach for business manager on the finance side means that they have 24/7 visibility to the status of things like billing. And it's much like tracking a flight. You always know exactly where it is and if it's late by how much, and so on. So let me share with you an example of a customer that I think will bring the whole story that we've been talking about together. So Navistar is a manufacturer of trucks. This is a company that has existed for well over 100 years. And when we did the case study with them, they shared with us that they own every technology under the sun that has ever come around, given how long they've stayed in business. One of the initiatives that they pursued was, they're a manufacturer of trucks, their customers are fleet owners, and one of the most important things for you as a fleet owner is making sure that the vehicles stay on the road and not in emergency repairs in the repair shop. All these trucks are fitted with hundreds of sensors. The idea at Navistar was, what if they could collect the sensor data and were able to apply machine learning algorithms and AI algorithms to that data and figure out and predict failures before there are failures. So if there are brakes on a particular truck that are about to have a problem, it sure would be nice to be able to predict that and notify the driver versus having a catastrophic breakdown in the middle of the highway. And we can all relate to that from our personal lives, that if our car breaks down in the middle of the highway, not only it's disruptive, but it's also extremely expensive to do emergency repairs. And same would be true at a much bigger magnitude if you owned hundreds of fleets as a fleet owner. So they embarked on this journey, and of course they were looking to ingest data from hundreds of thousands of vehicles. And this was going to be, by the way, a new line of business and a digital offer. So you will buy trucks from Navistar, and then you subscribe to this service, this paid service, and you will be notified when there's a problem. Now, the challenge here is that it's not just IoT data that they needed to deal with. If there's pressure and moisture and other kinds of metrics that are being reported by the sensors, that's not enough for Navistar to deliver the service. They need to understand the warranty data. They need to understand which dealership has the necessary parts, which dealership is the closest to the truck that's reporting the problem. All of that data is sitting in systems like SAP and the mainframe. Okay, so the challenge is bring all of this data together in a data lake, process it using a variety of different tools, and then feed it to machine learning algorithms and analytical dashboards and so on and so forth. So they adopted Control-M for the orchestration of this data pipeline, and the results were quite phenomenal from data ingestion perspective. It was accelerated by 90%. Data scientists had access to real-time data. They have, beyond just automation of the data pipeline, they were able to accelerate some of their initiatives like analyzing driver behavior. So it's not just analyzing the health of the engines, but also being able to analyze driver behavior. And the business outcomes for Navistar's customers have been that they have reduced vehicle downtime by 40% and unplanned repairs by 80%. This is extremely significant in the transportation industry because this is an industry that operates on thin margins to begin with. So anything that can keep their vehicles on the road and in service more is a direct boost to their margins. Another important achievement out of the implementation of Control M here was that their data scientists and Hadoop engineers were no longer spending time in building plumbing. Something that Chris highlighted from the survey is that you want your technical folks to be working on higher order, higher value problems. So building plumbing to move data around is not the most valuable thing for a highly sought after resources in data engineering. So they were able to now focus more of their times on algorithms and delivering insights, and Control M took care of the orchestration layer. And here's a high level view of what their environment looks like. So you can see in the ingestion phase, they had obviously 350,000 vehicles that were emitting lots of data through devices and sensors. They have mainframe, SAP, a little bit of public cloud, and then in the storage and processing, Hadoop was a major part of their architecture. And then several tools being used in the analytics and insight space, such as R, Tableau, and SAS. And Control M was the orchestration engine behind all of this. So hopefully that has given everybody an overview of the results of the survey that from the research that we commissioned with Forrester, and how Control M has been addressing the orchestration challenges in the market for our customers. This takes us to our favorite part of the presentation, which is Q&A. So Jay, I'll turn it back over to you.
See, and I thought you thought the favorite part was my head popping back up again. But anyway, so at the very beginning, when I gave the logistics, I asked people to put their questions in, but I think I kind of misguided some people and told them to put it in the chat. There's actually a question area that you can put it in there, and some people have already done that. So I'll take the easy one first. Someone asked if this presentation today and or the deck was going to be shared, and the answer is yes, we're going to share both. So over in the GoToMeeting panel, there's actually a little drop down that says handouts. So there's already today's presentation in that area. But in addition to that, anybody who is present today is also going to get an email following this with a link to the recorded webinar, as well as the content that we're presenting this morning. So I've got another question here. And this one looks like it's probably going to be directed to Basil, given some things that you showed. Says that Control M was shown as being an abstraction layer, but what happens when an application or a tool changes?
Yeah, so really good question. And we're seeing that more and more, particularly with the adoption of cloud. One of the things that cloud has provided companies is the ability to rapidly experiment because, infrastructure is really elastic, and, you only pay for what you use, and so on and so forth. So rapid experimentation also brings up the challenge of, how do you continue to orchestrate every time you are adding new pieces to the puzzle. And Control M has a really open architecture where there's a couple of things I think that are important to mention here. First of all, we offer a vast library of plugins that cover systems all the way from the mainframe to the most modern public cloud offerings and distributed systems in between. So things like SAP, Oracle, IBM's DB2, a lot of scripts. I think as Chris mentioned, a lot of companies still run on scripts, so automation of those scripts is all covered by Control M. And then we also have the ability to rapidly design new integrations to Control M through something we call application integrator. So for example, let's say there is a open source tool that has just emerged on the horizon, and Control M doesn't have an out-of-the-box plugin for it. Well, that doesn't mean you're out of luck. That simply means you use application integrator to design an integration. And when I say design integration, this is not a software development kit. This is a no-code, wizard-driven approach where you can rapidly develop an integration to that application, and now all the capabilities of Control M are extended to that application. So again, to recap, two important parts. First, we offer a vast library of plugins, and we continue to add more plugins as we see need from our customers and market. And whatever we can't cover out of the box, we provide a way for rapidly developing an integration.
Okay. So I've got one for Chris. Someone asked, yay, it's your turn. Someone asked, as companies move to the cloud, how do you see the key tenets of automation changing?
Sure. So one of the biggest concerns people have moving to the cloud is managing valuable assets, whether it's source code, whether it's managing access to those elements. So there's a couple of things that companies need to keep in focus is how they're going to transition their current set of rules for authorization, access rights to the cloud. So it's very important for IT professionals to learn the cloud infrastructure of choice system of managing those assets, managing that access, and if possible, using a system that integrates with your current, LDAP or ADFS system of choice, whatever it may be. The other thing that's going to change is that you're going to see things going much more quickly, right? The reason why people shift their software development or their automation to the cloud is exactly what Basil talked about, which is going faster. You have elastic infrastructure that allows you to create more environments more quickly. And so going faster means that you need to get it right the first time as much as possible. You want to make sure that you're using as few systems of different types of systems as possible to keep down the technical debt. And then when you're going fast and you're moving things to the cloud and you realize that you're in an environment where there's greater access and a larger number of attack vectors, it's important to remember that you're following your governance and compliance and automating those particular rules into your automation protocol. Because if you're not doing that, you might be asking for trouble. You might find out that data is being left in some unsecure area where you thought it was secure because you log into it, but it turns out everybody has access to it. Like I think some vendor had an S3 bucket that was wide open to people to access and harvest data right off of Amazon. So you don't want that happening. So the idea of going to the cloud is to go faster. The other thing that you need to remember is that when you move things to the cloud and you automate things in the cloud, you have to automate turning them off so that you don't drain your bank account. And so it's sort of like a full circle, right? You really have to understand and have greater understanding of what you're automating, what you're putting into the cloud, what its impact will be in that environment, how that environment is different from your on-premise environment. And then take advantage of it as much as you can. Take advantage of elasticity. Don't just run a particular application on the biggest piece of machinery you can and use 5% of the CPU. Really understand how scaling works, scaling up and scaling down, and then you'll get the full value of the cloud. You'll be secure and you'll feel like you're getting a lot of value out of it.
Okay. Yeah. Appreciate that, Chris. So there's a couple I'm going to read, and these are going to be pointed to Basil. So, because they're both kind of product questions. First one is pretty straightforward. Which version of Control M has orchestration capabilities?
Which version of Control M has orchestration capabilities?
Yeah.
All of them. So, but we would always obviously recommend the latest and greatest, so you get the most out of the product. So
the next one is asking a question about a couple of different BMC products. So it says, I see Control M is important as an orchestration tool within scheduled batch, but is there also ESB technology which can be orchestrated via the BMC product TrueSight? When do these two products integrate to address the whole thing?
So that's a really good question. In fact,
it's like a pre-sales technical call is what I sound
exactly.
I think the question is pertinent, and as I think about it, I probably should have included something in my slides to talk about that. So there's automation is pervasive across the organization, but there's different types of automation, and our focus from Control M is focusing on the orchestration of business applications and their workflows. So if you think back to the slide that I had up, which was kind of called the chaos slide or the spaghetti slide, where there's a lot of different services. So you think back to those services, when we go talk to our customers, what are the types of services that they're automating with Control M? Where these are things like automation of the financial close process of a bank, reconciliation across stores for a retailer, payment processing, and things of that nature. So, and there's a good reason for why those are the use cases, because Control M has always been focused on the application layer and the orchestration of that. However, the application layer is heavily dependent upon the underlying infrastructure. So obviously we have to have the capability to run across multiple types of infrastructure, mainframe, Windows, Linux and Unix systems, public cloud, Kubernetes. So that's where kind of the intersection of those two are. But there are other types of automation that are also important. For example, automation of how you instantiate environments. How do you configure infrastructure? That's a whole different domain called infrastructure automation. And BMC has been a player in that space for a while with products like Logic. TrueSight Orchestrator is particularly focused on the ITPA, IT process automation. So could you possibly use Control M to do some of the work that an ITPA tool does, and vice versa? Yes, but but one is designed to be better suited for that area. And this is why when you look at reports from Forrester and many of the analysts, those products are covered in separate categories.
Okay. So this one looks like it's probably directed to Chris, but I'm sure Basil could comment on it as well, just based on customer interactions he's had. But it says there seems to be a movement from project to product orientation with a focus on agility. How do you see that impacting teams and their use of automation?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great observation, and absolutely. And just to kind of, people think about that like project to product, like projects are bad, products are great. The reality is that there's going to be a mix, right? But the essence of that statement is that if you think about every single effort that you do, every piece of value you deliver as a product, you start to think about it more holistically than just, I have a series of work items. Once I check them off, I'm done. The idea of going from project to product, first of all, is to think about what is the result of that product? Did somebody enjoy it? Was it a delightful experience, or was the transaction, throughput what I hoped it would be? Is the scale able to achieve the scale that's necessary to support my customer workload? Those are things that people think about from a product orientation. They think about it from a complete, business value orientation versus just a series of work items. And so project to product, it really goes pretty deep, because it also causes you to think about things cross silo. You have business stakeholders who say, hey, I'm funding this effort because I want to see an improvement in some capability. Well, what typically happens in the project view is all that stuff gets put into a bunch of demand holding areas like project planners or agile planning tools, and then it gets divorced from the original objective and just becomes a series of independent work items that people feel like as soon as I can get them done, I'm done and I'm on to my next one. And it goes on to the next silo where there's perhaps quality, maybe there's some automation that happens, it gets released, and then 6 months later, the business stakeholders wondering, did this actually get done? Did anything happen? Is the customer happy or not? And it shows up in the ledger sheet. I'm thinking about things from a product perspective and an agile perspective. You really get back to what the Agile Manifesto is all about. Create small pieces of incremental business value, deliver them to your customers on a regular basis, measure the outcome of that value. Is it going in the right direction or going in the wrong direction? Adjust. You can't do that when you're broken up in a bunch of silos. You can't do that if your processes are all manual and stitched together by bubble gum and string. They need to be automated. They need to be a well-oiled machine. You need to be able to deliver these experiences in a very consistent manner. You need to be able to measure the outcome of those experiences so that your business stakeholders can see how to adjust, how to be agile, and you need to be able to bring all those teams together, either in some sort of matrix organization, a cross-functional organization, I don't care what you call it, but it's a product way of looking at something where there's an idea that says, I want to do something because I want to improve something, and then there's an outcome that says it was improved or it wasn't improved. You don't wait 3 years or a 2-year project to figure out whether or not you did anything right. You start working in very small increments, and the only way you can work in small increments, the only way you can do it consistently without tripping over yourself, is to automate as many of these processes as possible.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
I'm very passionate about that, as you can tell.
And I hope it comes through on my side. We'll see. We'll do a poll and see if everybody else appreciates that. So we probably have time for probably one more question, and I'm going to direct this one back to Basil because it's back to the product thing, and it leads me to believe there's an opportunity to maybe give some differentiation here or more definition. Because someone asked, what are the advantages of Control M orchestration over HPE operations orchestration? So,
you know, I don't think there's enough time for us to go through some kind of a competitive analysis, but I will say this. And this is a general statement about our market position and why we believe we have a solution that's ahead of others. There's a couple of things. One, it has been a continued area of focus within BMC. Control M is one of the fastest growing product lines, and it's one reason it's fastest growing is because we've been investing in it. The second is that, you know, if you think about the history of where Control M started, that domain was called job scheduling 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. The types of things that we are now offering to our customers, some of the things that I shared was expanding the library of plugins all the way from mainframe to the public cloud and everything that comes in between. Purpose-built interfaces for the right persona. You know, ops is comfortable using a lot of dashboards. Developers are comfortable interacting in APIs and code. Business users, none of this activity is for IT or the developers. It is in service of some business goals. Business users arguably are probably the most important stakeholders in this equation. As you saw in one of the examples from Sky TV that I shared, that business managers through Control M have complete visibility and control over the delivery of their services. They're tracking that just like they track anything else on their smartphones. The ability to not only offer a vast library of plugins, but rapidly develop new integrations if you have homegrown systems and things of that nature. So when you combine all of these things together, we have a very compelling offer in the market that makes us highly differentiated from the competition.
Okay. Well, we're right up against it. So Basil, thank you. Chris, thanks for being a guest speaker today. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And with that, we will, as I said before, if you attended today, expect to get a link from us with the content and a recording link. And appreciate your attendance today and have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.